It was a crisp fall morning when I first drove into Oak Ridge Hills, a picturesque neighborhood tucked away between rolling hills and a serene forest preserve. I wasn't expecting much more than peace and quiet, a nice little corner of the world to focus on my work. You know, the kind of place where you can park your ATV in the driveway without anyone batting an eye, and the biggest concern of the day is what kind of sandwich to pack for lunch. But I quickly learned, peace and quiet? That wasn't on the agenda here. As I turned into the driveway of my new home, I saw the unmistakable yellow boot clamped down on the front wheel of my ATV. My heart skipped a beat, one of those gut-wrenching moments where you think everything's about to go horribly wrong. For a split second, I thought the axle had snapped. The ATV bucked violently, sparks flying, and in the nick of time, I jumped off before it tipped over like a bull in a rodeo. And there she stood, Karen, the so-called HOA president, self-appointed sheriff of the subdivision, professional busybody, hands casually crossed, an arrogant smirk plastered on her face. "You were warned," she said, chin tilted upwards as if she'd just solved world hunger. I was stunned, not just because she'd gone full Karen and damaged my proper Tino. That wasn't even the crazy part. What really blew my mind was the fact that she had actually booted a moving vehicle while it was still in motion. As if that wasn't bad enough, Karen had no clue who she was messing with. I am Eli Whitlock, a terrain safety engineer contracted by the federal government to assess environmental risks for off-road access zones. This wasn't some weekend warrior ATV. No, my ATV was a professionally equipped machine used for environmental audits. I wrote the federal manual on terrain safety. And 2 days ago, I had arrived in Oak Ridge Hills to assess land here for erosion control and slope measurement. So when Karen decided to take it upon herself to boot my vehicle, what she didn't realize was that she was stepping into a game that she couldn't possibly win. She didn't know it yet, but the battle was just beginning. My first encounter with her had been the morning after I moved in. She marched up to me in a beige blazer like she was storming the Capitol, spouting off about noise pollution, unauthorized vehicles, and some vague notion of community safety that only existed in her delusional mind. I tried to keep it calm. I explained my ATV was federally certified, that it was for official environmental work, but Karen didn't care. She didn't even look at me. She just frowned, like I'd told her I was bringing a UFO to the neighborhood. "You can label it whatever you want," she snapped. "But here we respect silence and safety." I laughed it off. A mistake. From that day on, the passive-aggressive notes started. First one on my mailbox, then another on my windshield, then one zip-tied to my ATV's handlebars. The final warning was written in bold red ink. "Next violation will result in enforcement action." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Big mistake. Because Karen didn't just give warning, she gave war. Fast forward to the day she actually booted my ATV. I was parked on the edge of my property, logging some GPS coordinates for a slope measurement. I hadn't even turned the engine back on when I saw her. There she was, coming out of the shrubbery like some suburban velociraptor. I watched in disbelief as she darted forward, slapped the boot on my moving vehicle mid-turn, and locked it in place. The ATV lurched to one side, tipped over, and groaned like a wounded animal. I barely jumped off in time. And there she stood, the smugness in her eyes, holding up some self-made document like she was showing me a golden ticket. "This is a community violation," she declared, as though she was a judge pronouncing a death sentence. I stood frozen. "You just disabled a government vehicle," I said, still processing what had just happened. But she didn't even flinch. "You can file whatever complaint you want," she said. "But the HOA rules are clear. No unauthorized ATVs, period." And that was it. The tipping point. I turned back to my porch, grabbed a manila folder from my side table, and walked back down with every single piece of paperwork I needed. Licenses, permits, work orders, GPS trail maps, everything authorized by the Department of Environmental Oversight. I handed it to the jogger who had stopped to film. "You might want to capture this too," I said, "because this is the federal authorization you just violated." For the briefest moment, Karen's expression cracked, but she quickly recovered, like a character in a bad movie who refused to admit they were wrong. "I'll see you at the emergency board meeting." She huffed and disappeared behind her perfectly trimmed hedge. That night, I filed an official police report: property interference, vehicle sabotage, trespassing. The booting company she hired didn't have the proper permits, and their device wasn't rated for government-modified ATVs. The officer took one look at the camera footage, then asked, "She did this while you were moving?" "Yes, officer," I replied. "She booted a moving vehicle on private terrain during a federally supervised inspection." He shook his head. "We're going to have to call this in. Might be more legal heat than just a fine." By morning, word had spread. A dozen neighbors gathered around my downed ATV, and Karen, looking more frazzled than ever, tried to keep her cool, though her twitchy smile told a different story. That afternoon, flyers were dropped in mailboxes: emergency, HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. The topic? Dangerous vehicle use and community safety. The fuse had been lit. At the meeting, it felt more like a courtroom drama than anything else. The room was packed: neighbors, spectators, even a few who seemed to show up just for the show. Karen sat at the front, the queen of her delusion, delivering her opening remarks. Her speech was full of exaggerated warnings and an emotional appeal to how much she had sacrificed for the peace of Oak Ridge Hills. But when it was my turn, I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I clicked through a slideshow on the projector behind me. First, topographic maps. Then, heat overlays. Then trail integrity models, timestamp GPS data from my federally certified equipment. I turned to the room. "My name is Eli Whitlock," I began, "and I'm a terrain safety engineer with the Department of Environmental Oversight. I've been contracted to monitor and assess terrain resilience for 6 test sites in this region, including Oak Ridge Hills." I continued, calmly and firmly, as the room hung on every word. "This ATV is not a recreational toy. It is equipped with instruments calibrated to detect erosion, shifts in slope, and soil absorption failures. The path I use is an emergency access route registered with the county. Any interference with this path or its inspection violates state and federal environmental protocols." As the room processed this, Karen's smile began to waver. The board members leaned forward, their eyes widening as they realized this wasn't some neighborhood dispute, it was a legal nightmare. Then came the kicker: the footage. I clicked the remote again, and the screen lit up with a video showing Karen emerging from the bushes and slapping the boot onto my still-moving ATV. The room gasped. "Next clip," I said, "is audio of the confrontation where Karen claims authority over the emergency access trail." That's a lie. It's a criminal overreach of her powers. The board took a brief recess to digest what they'd just seen. When they returned, their tone had changed. "We'll review Karen's authority to enforce rules like this," Gordon, the acting president, said. "There will be an independent audit." It was clear Karen's little empire was starting to crumble. But Karen didn't go down without a fight. She tried to deflect, claiming I'd set her up, that I had intentionally provoked the incident. The paranoia was almost impressive, like a villain in a bad stage play. But the truth? The truth was undeniable. And soon, the neighborhood rallied behind me. A petition circulated, calling for a formal review of Karen's conduct. The HOA board began to distance itself from her. By midweek, Karen was being investigated for fraud, permit violations, and misuse of HOA funds. She tried to escalate, filing a complaint with the state attorney general, but the investigator quickly cleared me of any wrongdoing. It was over. The next HOA meeting was packed. People wanted answers. And when Gordon read the motion to suspend Karen's executive powers, the room was electric. Karen didn't even try to interrupt this time. She just sat there, stunned, as the vote passed. It was the beginning of the end. In the weeks that followed, Karen's carefully built facade crumbled. The board was restructured, the budget reviewed, and the community began to heal. But Karen? She disappeared overnight. She was gone. And the neighborhood? Well, it felt different. It felt free. The final twist? At the next community fundraiser, they auctioned off the boot that Karen had used to disable my ATV. It sold for $3,200. The money went to repairing the public bike racks and adding solar lights to the trail entrances. But even after Karen's departure, her story didn't end. People started sharing their own stories: how Karen had fined them for things that didn't even exist in the bylaws, how she had bullied them into submission. I had taken a stand, not for revenge, but for justice. And in the end, the truth had set Oak Ridge Hills free. But here's the thing: do you think Karen will ever learn? Do you think people like her can truly change? Leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you think? Was this justice? Or just the beginning of another fight?